thanks, Mika. My role now that you said everything that can go wrong, etc., is to tell you about policy. I don't know if that is something that is going wrong or that can be an opportunity. You will tell me after the end of my talk. But I think that it's really also an opportunity for us. And I guess that in the two previous presentations we were talking about what you can do and what we will do together here. It's really, I think, we are all influenced by what's happening in the policy space, because of course we all have to comply with what can happen. But at the foundation, what we will do, and that's partly what I will present, is takes the burden of pushing for better understanding and pushing for better positioning of open source in all of the upcoming policies. But why do we have to do that? So what's interesting is that, okay, 2011, Marc Andreessen told us that software was eating the world, and well, this morning we had a presentation about software-defined vehicle. So that's, I think that's when some kind of conservative industry like automotive is working so hard on software-defined, I think that the prediction is well realized. And the next point is that open source has eaten software. Because everything we know now is, so when I started in open source 20 years ago, open source and free software was really in strategies of commoditization of technology. So that was the time of the first deployments of Linux in front of proprietary Unixes, the time of databases, etc. Now, every time there is a new technology, there is upfront an open source approach to this new technology, which is super cool. And that's also why, for example, what we do in SDV is so exciting, because we are riding the wave of this new technology. And just one thing, that was said by Carlo yesterday, but that's super important, because our collective responsibility is to really stand for every time somebody wants to call open source something that don't comply with those 4 freedoms, we need to tell them they are wrong. Because the more open source becomes common, the more we hear people saying, well, open source. If I take the words open and source, if I just give access to my code, that's my definition of open source. No, there is one definition of open source, which is the one from the Open Source Initiative, and which is synonymous to the 4 freedoms of free software, which are the capability to run, to study, to modify, and to redistribute your software. And that's super important. Each of us has to stand for that. But also, and you are all developers. Well, most of you are developers. I don't know if the lawyers are here today. Where are the lawyers? No? Okay. Oh, yeah, we have our lawyers. They are the nice lawyers, because they are the lawyers who do open source. Thanks. But this week we had a few, well, 5 lawyers maybe, and the rest was developers. But it's really interesting when you think about it, that open source is really at the beginning about intellectual property management. So there is a way of managing intellectual property as proprietary software, and there is a way of managing it in open source. But still, why it's so cool to do open source? Because you, as a author of your software, you can decide to publish your software under an open source license. Everybody on the planet can decide to consume your software under this open source license. And the 2 superpowers is that the license is 2 to 3 pages long, and everybody, everywhere in the world understands the license in the same way. So that's really what enables the collaborations. So but still, that's, we are developers who more or less do some kind of legal stuff without knowing it when we select a license. Another aspect, and that's just to come to the policy topic, because it's super important to see that everything we have today is based on free, and that's mostly on free standards and free software. Because, so those two guys, you may have a hint about who he is. So on the left, that's Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the web. And on the right, that's Vint Cerf, who is one of the inventors of the internet. And so that was a photo taken for the 30th anniversary of the World Wide Web. And of the W3C, sorry. And when you think about it, what they did 30 or 40 years ago, there were lots of network technologies. There were lots of tentatives to structure knowledge, etc. But what made it successful is that it was available to everybody, and very quickly we had open source implementations that enable the deployment of what we know today, which has been built on top of internet and the web. To the point that 80 to 90% of applications is made of open source components. And then we have the problems that were described by my colleague Mika. And Mercedes, I don't know if Wolfgang is here. Yeah, well, so we use you in our slides now because that's so cool. So we have him on camera saying that today you cannot develop software without doing open source. I think that we all believe that, and that's super cool. And that's where we arrive to the policy, because we have three topics to discuss. There is the topic of regulation, there is the topic of supporting open source, and there is the topic of leveraging open source. So regulation, it's our world now, software and open source is everywhere, is in every regulation. I was talking with Astor Numelin-Carlsberg, who is the executive director of Open Forum Europe, and he likes to say that 10 years ago, there were only one legal file where open source was relevant. Now, at the European level, and that's the same at the US level, and that's likely the same in every national level in Europe, in almost every file, open source and software can be relevant. Whether it's topics that are very close to our domains, like smart city, digital sovereignty, privacy, etc., or even when it's topics like, agriculture. So smart agriculture, of course, well, we want software to do that. Vehicles, how do we, the future pollution regulation and SDV, what happens to that, etc. And the good part of it is that our policy, well, in our institutions, they know open source. They want to use open source, and there was something important in our domain, which was this document published by the European Commission, so that was 3 years ago already, which was called the Open Source Software Strategy of the European Commission, in which they say that they want to leverage open source for the collaboration, for the innovation, and to enrich society and focus on lowering the cost to the society. That's super cool, because that was the first document at the European level that was approved by policymakers. But the point, maybe the weakness of this is that it was coming from the IT department of the European Commission. So the good success, and they are doing a wonderful job, But the good success of the people from the OSPO of the European Commission is that they managed to publish such a document. But still, they are the IT department, so they are the people who do the internal IT systems for the European Commission. And they want to use open source, that's cool. But, so one thing is that we are not under the radar anymore. So I think that everybody understands that because of some of the threats that appeared recently, everybody in the policy landscape heard about this thing called open source. They heard about Linux, they heard about Log4Shell, they heard about these kind of things. So we are not under the radar. So they want to regulate software, and when they want to regulate software, and when they read that, oh, 80% of software is open source, we will regulate open source. Sure, of course. And, well, they are likely right. They should address the global topic. So one problem is that we have one lawyer in the attendance today, but they have one person who was a software developer, who used to be a software developer in the European Parliament, for example. Out of 700 people, they have one policymaker who knows what is software and knows even better what is open source. And you will tell me lawyers don't need to know the topics they want to regulate. And that's what they tell us, and that's fine, that's fair, that's a good point. But what's potentially different with software is that we all know that it's very, how do you call it? Liquid or fluid, that software is very fluid. So that, of course, we do a release, but for example, we have these practices of publishing nightly builds or stuff like that. And nightly builds is not something that happen in the appliance market, etc. When you want to regulate the market of automotive or stuff like that, they don't do nightly builds of an appliance. So we have this problem that we need to reach a moment when we collaborate properly with the policymakers, and we need to establish this relationship where they trust us to participate in the making of the regulation in a way that we can tell them, wow, you think that can work for our ecosystem, but we know our people. We know that they are not hostile to doing better in terms of security. They want the best for their users. But the problem is that maybe what you suggest today, that will just not work, because that's because of the core properties of software and of the core properties of open source. So yeah, and ultimately, on this regulation topic, I won't enter the details because we had lots of stuff already on the CRA, and you can go to our website to see our webinars, the blog posts, etc. But just at some point, there will be some regulation, and what we do and what we get ready to do is to embrace it and to help and to support our community. Because if ignoring the law is no excuse, unfortunately we reach a point where being open source is no excuse. So that's something that we will have to manage. But we will manage it. I'm fully confident that we can adapt to this new to those new regulations that are coming, and that's also where being part of a foundation is super important, because we can do it together, and we have the teams to help you do it. If you are just alone on GitHub or GitLab, that's another story. Just to be a bit more positive, is that policymakers also want to support open source. And there was this very good campaign by the Free Software Foundation Europe that was saying public money, public code. And in public money, public code, basically what they say is that everything that is funded by tax money and that is for public administration, etc., should be open source. And that's good, and more or less that's something that has been integrated in the policy frameworks. Still, on our side, you know this slide, but on our side, what we think is that not everything should be open source, but most of it should be open source. And everything where there is a collaboration should be open source. And we think that it's fine to have some products that are built on top of this open source corpus. One thing that is interesting is that, and we have been doing that for 10 years now in research, is how we can help people who receive public funding to do better open source. And we have the idea more or less of a research consortium, for example, is that you put together software vendors, industry players, researchers around a shared platform. And what we push is that, well, look, it will work better if your platform is open source. And we have been successful about that. So now, if you get public funding, it's likely that you will be asked to tell, okay, how do you ensure the sustainability of the result, etc.? How do you ensure that what you do can be reused or can continue to live after the end of the funding? And we have been doing that for years now, and we come to the point where we explain that it's not just about publishing the code that will ensure that it's sustainable. It's really building a community. And what I would love to do, one of my dreams, is that ultimately we change some of the metrics in public tenders to have a metric that tells you that the number of lines of code, of open source code that you have produced per dollar or per euro. And okay, I know some of our friends here have projects for code generation, so maybe you can trick the system, but you can trick any system. I think that if we push for something like that, it's something where we can do a better transformation of money into code. And I think that in this crowd, that's something that should be very interesting. Last point about policy is digital sovereignty. So digital sovereignty is a concept you hear a lot in Europe, because for some reasons, Europe realized that we are not the leaders in the software industry. And so at some point, we use lots of software that is being built in the other places of the world. And digital sovereignty means, okay, we want to master our digital destiny. And what's interesting is that open source is global. We have people from 31 countries in this conference, so that's definitely a global topic. But I think that open source enables digital sovereignty, because digital sovereignty is about having the capability to install and to manage, to master the technologies we want to use in your system, and to avoid vendor lock-in or stuff like that. And that's where open source has really lots of superpower to enable that. We have some very interesting projects about digital sovereignty, and especially in the domain of data space. Data space is more or less a very European concept, I think. because that's integrates some of the values, European values, including privacy, including how can you share data and still respect privacy, etc. And we invest a lot in that. And the good news is that most of the initiatives around data space end up submitting code and collaborating in open source at Eclipse. So that's super cool. And to conclude on this topic of digital sovereignty, my wish is that when you hear about digital sovereignty and what you think is that with open source, we can help, we can fully support digital sovereignty because we have the capability to run, study, and modify important projects in Europe. And I say in Europe, but I really believe that like open source is global, that digital sovereignty in Europe, thanks to open source, applies in Africa, applies in South America, applies also to some extent in the US and in China. That's true everywhere, and that's super cool. The second one is foster collaboration and improve efficiency. And I think one of the proofs of that is what we do with SDV, for example, is that we manage to have all the automotive industry improving the way they collaborate. And the last one is, and I really believe in it, is about leadership. I think that, you know, with open source, we can create the best projects, and wherever you create them, you want to integrate members from everywhere to join your community. And what you can do is really to create game-changing technologies, and those game-changing technologies will spread everywhere because they are open source. And if they would not be open source, that would not work. So, well, that's my conclusion. That's what I push every time I meet with policy people in Europe, because that's mostly where I work. But what I tell them is that when you give funding to a project, tell them that, okay, they should publish results in open source. Even better, they can contribute to open source project. But they should not be shy. It really, if you think about it, some of the projects we use today, they didn't start with an investment of 100 million or something like that. If you have a few good developers, plus somebody to manage the community, plus you establish a partnership with an organization like an open source foundation, like us, then you have a chance to create those kind of game-changing technologies and to get adoption worldwide. So moving the mindset in Europe from, okay, we are under pressure from everything, from all those softwares coming from everywhere, to we can use open source to collaborate, to build our own solutions, and to export them everywhere. So, thank you. And, well, any question? No? So, well, thank you for coming. I know that, oh, sorry. Excuse me. Okay, so the first one is, why do we explain? Well, because okay, the point is that we are, okay, the question is why I think it's fair for them to regulate something they don't understand. I think that's an interesting question. So regulators, understand regulations. And there is a way of, they understand the ins and outs of creating new regulations. They understand how a regulation should leverage on the existing regulations, etc., etc. It's hardly possible for them to master all the domains that they will have to regulate over their life. You have only a few, and we had a presentation. I don't know if you had the opportunity to go there, but we had a presentation from a lawyer involved in Katina X earlier this week, and it seems, so I think that if you think about Europe, you don't have thousands of lawyers who really understand fully open source, and there may be more who understand software, but not a lot who understand open source. And by the way, I have another dream. I would love when we try to teach them what is open source, or to explain them what is open source. You know, there will be elections in the European Parliament next year. I dream that we could set up a workshop where the new elected people can experience writing something in Python, for example. Like, you know, the understanding, going for, you know, we use a Scratch to explain software in the kindergarten. Why should not we do that for our policymakers? I mean, I'm not naive to think that policymakers will become experts in software. They are experts in policy. That's my point. Yeah, sure. Good point. So they are not experts. They always rely on external experts for the topic. And one of the problems is that, for example, with the CRA, before they consulted the industry, they talked to the industry before writing the CRA. They just didn't know us at the time. And well, Mike and what we did to promote the problems of the CRA made it visible. To some extent, the CRA, the good part of the CRA is that it puts the light on the open source community and on the fact that the open source community is not only hobbyist, but also that open source is sustaining a big part of our economy. And now they understand that, and they know who to talk to when they have questions about this topic. So I think that in Europe, and I think it's already the case in the US, next time there is something that has an impact on open source, we will be part of the experts. And the second question I forgot. Lines of code. Well, give me something better. My point is, I want to go for some metrics. So, for example, in lots of projects, you receive public funding. You are asked to show your success. And sometimes the success is how many tweets you have done. Or that's an acceptable metric, you know? And I think, from my perspective, lines of code would be a much better metric. But any other question? No? So, well, thanks for coming. I know that on the Thursday morning, and including for me, that's not so easy. So that's thanks for coming and for listening. And now let's go let's enjoy the rest of the day. And, well, let's enjoy the coffee.